Has U.S. intelligence confirmed that the Al-Shifa hospital is actually a Hamas base? Plus, are negotiations for the hostages already taking place? I'm going to be breaking it all down. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's November 15th, 2023. This is your Israel-Hamas unbiased update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, real quick, I wanted to point out a quick note before we get into the main part of this that the level of escalation with Lebanon has been pretty significant. You can see in the last 24 hours, we're looking at a tremendous number of Israel and Hezbollah strikes, and how Netanyahu has put the Israeli military on standby for what he's calling all contingencies for operations in northern Lebanon. It's sort of implied that that could include a ground invasion. Now, when we zoom in, you can see Israel has completed its encirclement of northern Gaza. But what I thought was most interesting is that the White House's John Kirby has said the U.S. has its own independent intelligence, right? That means that it's gathered not passed to it through Israeli sources, but through our own sources within Hamas, showing that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad are using the Al-Shifa hospital and other hospitals for holding hostages and for military activities. Kirby added that Hamas has a command and control center in Al-Shifa hospital. He said the U.S. doesn't still want to see the hospital bombed and doesn't want to see a firefight at the hospital. Now, of course, the comments are saying exactly what any one of the regular viewers of this channel already knows. We've talked about that. It hasn't really been a secret, and the Israelis themselves have released some fairly solid evidence that the Palestinian or Hamas has bases under this hospital. But also, here's the thing: Israel is. They aren't ghouls, right? They're not going to deliberately target hospitals for no reason. So when they said, hey, we are targeting this hospital, we think that Hamas is underneath it. And the fact that the hospital, if Israel wanted to totally destroy the hospital, like, they have the military capacity to do so. And they have destroyed other hospitals. So the fact that this one is still standing is itself reflecting a level of restraint. And what I also think is important to note is that in this sort of military operation, particularly an asymmetric conflict like this, Hamas chooses in its own right the places it does and doesn't fight. And it chose to build a base under a hospital, knowing the Israelis would look bad or be less willing to attack it. And they also chose to defend this site. Most military doctrine does tell you that you want to be able to pick up your headquarters and move at any time. And so the fact that they've used this as a command and control center and that they are defending it with force is a deliberate choice, and again, a choice by both sides, that the civilians in the crossfire just aren't that important. And again, as we've talked about elsewhere in the channel, that sort of disgusts me on a soul level as someone who, in the course of patrols found medical complexes where the Taliban were in control, that the Taliban used to treat their own fighters, but because they also provided services to the local civilian population, of course, it was never even considered that we might destroy the hospital, right? I mean, we might destroy a medical facility that treats civilians. Instead, we simply said, hey, we know that the Taliban used this site. We record it. We had drones fly overhead and watch them. And then we used the intelligence we gathered from that to run down the networks. It was a more efficient system, and it didn't involve us destroying clinics. And so that's why I sort of have negative judgment for both sides in this one. But I want to point out the Israeli military seems to be starting to get the message that the aggressive actions towards obvious civilian infrastructure, even if Hamas is operating in tunnels underneath it, the Israeli army, is surrounded the Shifa complex. And while there's a lot of gunfire and artillery, it sounds like they are at least trying a little bit to not totally put these civilians in the middle of the fight. Now, surrounding the hospital but not trying to kick down the doors is itself a good sign. But again, nobody's forced Hamas to turn this into a base. And, it's a war crime to blatantly disregard civilian casualties when conducting military operations, but it's also a war crime to use purely civilian medical sites as military sites, right? So, this is like we don't need to make analogies, right? That's going to get me canceled. Just know you can make a robust case for each of these guys committing some serious war crimes around this Al-Shifa hospital operation. That said, here's what I thought was really interesting. According to the Israeli Broadcast Corporation, negotiations are underway for a prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas. There's some precedent for this, and I'm sort of surprised this is happening full stop because the Israelis really don't want to encourage future hostage taking. This is the problem, right? If you establish that you can free some of your prisoners by taking Israeli civilians hostage, you are validating and encouraging the kidnapping of Israeli civilians. That's one of the reasons the United States, when they say we don't negotiate with terrorists, it means that literally if you take a U.S. citizen hostage, it is illegal for you to pay off hostage release fees. Most European countries don't operate this way, and oftentimes they will negotiate for their citizens' release, or they will allow their citizens' families or even kidnapping insurance to make these payouts, right? You can buy kidnap insurance in the EU. You can't really buy it in the United States. It's illegal. So the fact that Israel is going to go through with this, on one hand, you want to see hostages released. And if there were Palestinians who were purely political prisoners, right? Palestinians advocating for the country of Palestine, but not committing terror attacks or anything like that, you'd want to see them released as well, right? Political prisoners released, civilian hostages who don't have anything to do with this conflict. You want to see them released. You don't want them to be in the middle again. But it's curious to me that the Israelis are even willing to entertain some of this. Anyway, that is really all I had. The only thing I wanted to mention is that if you're familiar with my Ukraine content, you know that I have a company called Strike Gum. This is a veteran-owned company. We make a gum that is an energy drink alternative. It has 0 sugar, 90 milligrams of caffeine. It's exactly what I needed when I would go on patrols in Afghanistan that I didn't have. I had to resort to lukewarm energy drinks loaded with sugar, carbonated, and just gross. So if you're interested, you can check us out, right? Actually 50% of the profits from my first production run here of Strike Gum are going to be donated to charities that support Ukrainian civilians who have been injured or displaced by the conflict. So check us out, strikegum.com, and get your energy drink alternative today. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate you tuning in and, tuning in for these unbiased updates. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Tell the YouTube algorithm that what I'm making is good content and isn't totally hyperbolic. And that's it. Thanks a lot. See you in the next one. Cheers.